Making a handmade journal is easier than you may think. Today we'll be demonstrating how to make a journal using the Coptic Stitch Binding method, and our example today will be a simple journal with no cover. First, we'll review the materials you'll need. For your materials in general, you'll want paper for your journal. For today's demonstration, I used 15 pages of 140-pound watercolor paper. And the type of paper you use inside your journal really depends on how you want to use your journal. If you expect that you'll be mostly writing, sketching with pencils, charcoal, crayons, or gel pens, and maybe a little pasting, then regular copy paper, sketching, or decorative paper will work just fine. You could even use newsprint. Because these lightweight papers fold, wrinkle, and tear easily, they're great if your work will be mostly dry. If you plan to use watercolor, acrylic, gouache, gesso, and inks, or if you think you'll be doing much collage work that may also get liquid from the glue, you'll want a heavier paper, like 140-pound watercolor paper. I like to use a high-quality watercolor paper like Arches. It has such a lovely feel to it, and it can really hold up to your paints, inks, and glue. You'll also want some waxed thread, a tapestry needle, binder clips, a bone folder, pencil, awl, and a ruler. So once you have all those together, we can get on to the fun part. So to begin, we start by folding our paper. So you just take your paper and on the long side, fold it in half. You want to line up the corners as neatly as you can so that they'll be even. And then just put a nice crease there. Depending on the kind of paper you use, maybe your thumb will be fine if it's just a thinner paper, but if it's a thicker paper, like the 140-pound watercolor paper, you'll want a bone folder or something that's firm and doesn't have any rough edges to help really make that crease nice and strong. And then just do that for each one of your pages. Once you have all of your pages folded, we're just going to stack them now. I typically put about 3 pages inside each other, and then we put them together. We're going to call them signatures. Now, with heavier paper, you don't want as many pages in there, but if you're using the thinner papers, like for sketching, like we talked about earlier, maybe like copy paper, you might, maybe even put 5 pages in there. But for this demonstration, I just did 3 of them inside each signature so that I ended up having a total of 5 signatures. And there we go. Now we're going to figure out where we're going to be poking our holes. So I just open up my signature and I draw a little dot in the middle, and it doesn't really matter where the holes are. It's kind of up to preference there, but I like to make it easy for me, so I find that center mark, and then I think here, I'm just marking 1 inch 3 times from each end, and then I do that in each one of my signatures. So I find the middle, and then I mark it 1 inch each from each end. Just do that for all of them. Now we get to start poking our holes. So take your signatures, we're going to do them one at a time, and grabbing that awl, we're just going to start poking it through where each one of those marks are. Remember how surprising it was to me the first time I did this, how easily that awl just went through all that paper, even though I was using heavy watercolor paper, but it just slid right through, and there was something really satisfying about the feeling of that, and that feeling, that resistance, and then working through it, and that smooth glide of the awl poking the holes. And then you just do that for the rest of your signatures till all those holes are poked. Now, as I did this next signature, I was feeling that the paper is moving around a little bit, so I used these binder clips just to hold the pages in place while I poke the holes, so I wouldn't have to worry about the holes being misaligned. You can use big paper clips, even bobby pins will work, just something to hold that paper. Sometimes I've even used little bits of masking tape that comes off easily just to kind of tape those top edges together. And now we're going to thread our needle. And to decide how much thread you need, usually I go like 2 lengths per signature. Sometimes I do 3. So if you run out of thread when you're in the middle of this project, it's really not a big deal. You can just, like when you're on the inside of a signature, tie a knot near the end of your thread and then just start a new one. Just knot it on. But for this demonstration, I thought I got, I didn't quite have enough, and it turned out I had actually just enough. So get your length of thread, thread your needle, and then at the very end of it, I like to tie just a really solid knot, so I know it won't go through the holes that I poked, so it's bigger than the holes, and then it could hold up to, water and acrylics, whatever I put in there, and some use. And then you just start from the inside of the first signature, just thread your needle through it in that first hole, and then just go in and out. Pulling it all the way through. Sometimes the thread doesn't come quite all the way through, so you just want to make sure you've got all of it. You can see how sometimes when you're binding this, the thread gets caught on the corners, so that's just part of the process. When you get to the very end of it, you're just going to start heading back the other way. This time we're coming in from the outside, going back in. I think there I had actually split my thread a little bit, had to readjust that. Pull it nice and tight. Not so tight that it'll bend your paper, but tight enough that it's not loose. Then when you get back to the first hole, you poke your needle back through that very first hole that you started with. And maybe pat yourself on the back because you just finished your first signature. And it's very simple to move on to the next signature. You just line them up, and at that top hole, poke your needle through. And this time, all we're going to do is after we poke that needle through that second signature, we're going to loop it around. There we are. You're just going to loop it around the outside of the adjacent hole from the first signature and loop it back. So you're just kind of catching that thread. We don't go in and out on the inside signatures. You only go in and out, creating that whole stitching along the ends of the signatures. The signatures are on the outsides, but the ones that are inside of the journal, you just need to loop around. And actually what you'll see, and you'll see it as we move forward with this, it makes this sort of nice embroidered like stitching along the edge of the binding. It's really quite pretty. We use wax thread because it's just very durable and it slides through the holes so well. So I think the wax helps strengthen the thread and then just makes it glide through a little easier. But at the same time, it can be a little sticky sometimes. So that's why you see it catching so often on the corners as I'm trying to weave it in and out. Now we're getting ready to move on to the third signature, so we just again loop through on the edge, and looping back again. I like that little extra security there coming on the inside of the previous signature and going back out. And then just starting on the third signature. Of course, feel free to slow this video down, adjust the speed, or speed it up, whatever makes sense for you. If you want to catch more details, you can slow it down. If you got it, then you can speed it up. You can see how it's making those nice little rows of stitching along the edges. I don't like really thick journals, but I love the look of the stitches along the binding. So sometimes I have to decide if I'm just going to make a bigger journal just so I can see more stitches. Typically, the journals I make are 3 to 5 signatures, though. But you'll find what works for you. Just need to start someplace. And then after you do it and you see, oh, well, that wasn't so bad, you might make some more and then decide what size paper you want, how thick you want your journal to be. And it also may depend on what type of paper you use. For the thinner papers, you can make thicker journals. I like to make journals for different books that I'm reading, different classes that I'm taking, different issues in life that I'm exploring. It's very much a tool that I use as part of my meditation practice. So I have a number of different journals that help me explore what I am contemplating in my meditation. The insight that comes up really helps me to see this visually. So these visual journals that we're making really help that. Now that we're on the last one, you can see how we're still kind of keeping that same process of looping back and forth, catching the previous row, and then at the end I like to go back through and create that line of stitches just like we had at the beginning. But in order to do that, I have to come through on the inside, loop it around, and go back out. And then I'll have a nice row of stitches along the front, the top, and the bottom. You can see I had just enough thread to tie a knot at the end. So close. I like to make a nice big knot. Make sure it's sturdy, won't go through the holes, even with a lot of use. And there you have it. Look at that. So pretty, so nice, and waiting for the lovely art and insight that you're going to fill that journal.